In a packed congressional chamber with 24 million Americans watching live, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett confronted Donald Trump with evidence of $15.2 million in hidden overseas wire transfers and didn't blink. As Trump slammed the desk and shouted, "Lies," before 42 reporters, Jasmine calmly held up the documents that could collapse his empire. When fury meets receipts on live TV, whose truth will America believe? In the next few seconds, you will witness the truth that they never wanted the public to know. The congressional chamber felt like a pressure cooker, velvet carpet cold, marble walls, and 24 million Americans holding their breath from behind screens. Cameras rolled in silence, their red lights blinking like loaded rifles aimed at history. Donald Trump sat tall at the center table, flanked by advisors in sharp suits, his smile smug, the kind worn by men who've never been cornered. He adjusted his cufflink like it mattered more than the hearing itself. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, looked still, not stiff, still like a coiled spring. She was dressed in deep navy, no accessories, except the weight of what she carried. Her hands rested on a single black folder in front of her, its corners worn down like it had been opened and closed 100 times in private. Now it waited in public. The room knew her name. She had made waves before, but today she didn't come to speak for airtime. She came to land something no one could walk away from. The chairman called her name, just once, no fanfare. But the air changed instantly like a shift in pressure before a thunderstorm. Jasmine stood without a word, fingers gliding over the folder's edge, and the nation leaned forward. Trump's jaw clenched as he turned toward her, an involuntary flinch masked as a smirk. Aides behind him stiffened, not visibly, but enough to register on camera. One of them touched his earpiece. Another reached for a notepad as if preparing to spin the next 60 seconds into something survivable. Jasmine cleared her throat once lightly and opened the folder. No grand theatrics, just paper meeting air. What emerged first wasn't even a statement. It was a number. She read it without blinking. March 12, 2018. A wire transfer of $2.4 million. The sound of that number landed like a dropped glass on tile, originating from an account in Zurich, destination Trump International Holdings. Account holder Donald J. Trump Jr. The silence didn't just settle, it cut. Trump's fingers curled on the table. His smile cracked. "That's a lie," he barked, voice already too loud for the moment. "An absolute lie." His finger jabbed in the air. "You people are disgusting. You'll do anything to smear my family." But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't even blink. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, like he was just another page in a file she'd already read. "Sir," she replied, tone surgical, "these records are not my words. They come directly from an anonymous whistleblower inside a financial institution. Dates, account numbers, wire transfers, all verified." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Phones buzzed silently under desks. A whisper caught faintly by a hot mic fluttered from the back. "Oh my God." Trump leaned forward, both hands now pressed to the table. "You think you can walk in here with papers from a trash bin, and you can walk out if you'd like?" Jasmine interrupted, voice steady. "But the American people are watching, and they deserve answers. No yelling, no grandstanding, just fire wrapped in calm." And suddenly, 24 million people forgot to breathe. The moment hung in the air like a live wire humming with tension. Trump's face twisted, part fury, part disbelief, as Jasmine Crockett lowered the paper gently to the table. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he leaned in, voice rising fast. "Lies, disgrace, a witch hunt." The words came like gunfire, scattered and frantic, meant less to convince and more to drown. Cameras snapped to him instantly, capturing every red vein, every furious twitch of his jaw. Jasmine didn't move. The storm was inches from her, but she stood like stone, her hands steady, her voice sharper than ever. "Sir," she said again, her tone not changing, not cracking, "these aren't my words. They're bank records, documented, verified, dated." Trump pounded the table. "Garbage, you're waving garbage around." His aides behind him whispered furiously, a blur of hands and notes, but none dared stop him. He was off script now, driven by instinct and drowning in it. "You think you can come in here, some junior congresswoman with trash from a photocopier, and smear my son?" His voice broke not out of weakness, but rage, the kind of rage that didn't understand how it was suddenly losing control. Jasmine lifted a second page, slowly, deliberately. The microphones picked up the soft sound of paper sliding across wood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This transfer, she said, was cleared through Deutsche Bank's private branch in Geneva, account ending in 1473. The recipient, an offshore firm owned by Trump Jr., routed through the British Virgin Islands. A gasp, quiet but collective, rose from the back rows. Reporters fumbled with notepads, staffers froze mid-scroll on their phones, and one senator muttered under his breath, "Jesus Christ." Trump shot to his feet. His shadow loomed large against the chamber lights, his finger stabbing the air like a weapon. "You're lying. You don't know a damn thing about business, about deals. My family has built more for this country than your entire party ever has." Jasmine didn't budge. Her eyes locked on his, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter and somehow even more devastating. "What your family built is not the question. What your family hid, that's what we're here to discuss." The line sliced through the room. Trump turned to his lawyers, his arms flailing, searching for someone to rescue him from the unraveling. But no lifeline came. The hearing room had turned into an arena, and the crowd wasn't cheering. They were watching, calculating, recording. Zurich, Dubai, Hong Kong. Jasmine continued flipping one page after another with surgical grace. "You can deny it, Mr. President. You can shout it down. But these aren't whispers. These are receipts." He tried to speak, but his voice caught just for a beat. The silence that followed was not mercy. It was tension winding tighter. Then from Jasmine, "You say this is a witch hunt. I say the truth doesn't need a broomstick, just a bank ledger." Laughter didn't break out, applause didn't follow, but something worse happened. The room fell completely silent and stayed that way. Trump, still standing, breathed heavily, his face flushed deep red. His eyes scanned the room for an ally and not a distraction, but all he found were cameras and the woman across from him, unshaken. In that moment, for the first time in years, the room no longer belonged to Donald Trump. It belonged to the truth, and she was holding it. The folder was still open. Jasmine Crockett hadn't finished, and somehow that terrified the room more than what had already been revealed. She didn't look at Trump. Not yet. Instead, she slid her fingers across the next page like it was glass holding a detonator. Her voice, still calm, still unshaken, cut clean through the tension. April 9th, 2020. Wire transfer of $5.8 million. She looked up now, straight at him. Origin Emirates NBD Dubai. Destination A holding company owned by Ivanka Trump. The room gasped. Not the dramatic kind. The real kind, sharp inhales, clutched chest, eyes darting from Trump to Jasmine like watching a dam crack before it burst. Phones buzzed in pockets on desks under folders. Aides scrambled to unlock screens. Some didn't even try to hide it anymore. Reporters were typing midair. Trump stood frozen, lips parted, hands open as if to catch something that had already fallen. The color drained from his face, not from fear but fury, because this wasn't just about him anymore. This had crossed into family, into legacy, into Ivanka. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Jasmine didn't give him the chance to spin it. She stepped forward slightly, her voice still level, slicing the stillness. "Mr. President," she said, pausing just long enough to let everyone lean in, "do you deny this account exists?" The silence after the question wasn't empty. It was charged. It filled the chamber like smoke before fire. Senators looked at one another. Some leaned back in their chairs, suddenly not sure whose side they were supposed to be on. Others stared forward motionless like hostages to the moment. A single cough echoed too loud. Trump blinked. Once. Twice. Then he spoke, but not like before. "This is disgusting," he muttered, voice low and tight fists balled on the table. "Dragging my daughter into your circus." But it wasn't an answer, and everyone knew it. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Sir, with all due respect, the American people aren't interested in theatrics. They're interested in the truth. Was this money disclosed? Was this company declared Trump rose again slower this time? The fire in him hadn't died, but it had changed. No longer explosive, now defensive, controlled only by sheer ego. You think this makes you a hero? You think this matters to anyone out there? No, she said. I think it matters to everyone who still believes the presidency isn't for sale. A rustle rippled through the press gallery. The tension was unbearable now, not because of shouting, but because of how quiet the chamber had become. Quiet like a standoff. Quiet like the second before a verdict. Trump's lawyer leaned over, whispered something frantic in his ear. He waved him off like a fly. Jasmine held the paper up slightly, not dramatically, just enough for the cameras to see. Black ink, highlighted name, number to count. Date. It spoke louder than any finger-pointing ever could. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped like a final pin pulled from a grenade. The account exists. The transfer exists. The name exists. Then she looked at him once more, eyes unblinking. So the question isn't whether this happened. The question is, why was it hidden? And with that, the silence cracked not with a scream, but with uncertainty. Lawmakers fidgeted, phones buzzed harder. Somewhere in the back row, a senator whispered, "She just cornered him." But Trump didn't respond. Not with words, not yet. Because when the truth is undeniable, it doesn't need to raise its voice. And the only thing left is to see if power will admit it, or try to crush the one who dared to say it. The footage hit the country like a thunderclap. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett locking eyes with the most powerful man in America and asking with devastating calm, "Do you deny this account exists?" flooded every screen it could reach. TikTok loops repeated her line over and over with slow zoom edits and heartbeat sound effects. Twitter threads dissected every blink, every breath. By the time the hearing ended, her voice had already left the chamber and entered the bloodstream of the nation. In a barbershop on Chicago's South Side, the clippers went silent. Four men stared at the mounted TV above the mirror, their heads tilted as if trying to listen beyond the broadcast. One of them, a Vietnam vet in a faded bomber jacket, leaned forward in his chair and said it low like a secret. "She's not scared of him." The others nodded without speaking the words too sharp to dull with small talk. In a Kansas diner between mouthfuls of biscuits and gravy, a farmer in his 60s pointed a butter knife toward the television bolted to the wall. "She's not yelling," he said, more impressed than confused. "He's yelling, but she's—" He stopped searching for the word. "She's still." The waitress beside him, no older than 20, whispered, "She's colder than a sniper, and twice as precise." On a college campus in Atlanta, dorm rooms erupted like watch parties on election night. Students huddled around laptops, phones, iPads, anything with a screen. One student, still wearing headphones from class, pulled them off and said, "Run that back, right there, where she says, 'The presidency isn't for sale.'" They rewound, watched again, then posted it. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman. She was a signal. The kind of signal people feel in their gut before they understand it in their minds. In a retirement home in Arizona, two old men who hadn't agreed on politics since the Reagan era sat shoulder to shoulder in the rec room. One of them, a lifelong conservative, muttered, "He used to control the room." Now the room's listening to her. The other nodded eyes, never leaving the screen. On TikTok, a looped clip of Jasmine's final sentence from the hearing. "The truth doesn't need a broomstick, just a bank ledger," was stitched into duets with lawyers, analysts, even comedians. Hashtags like #ReceiptSpeak, #StillnessWins, and #Crockett vs. Trump hit millions within hours. But this wasn't just viral. It was viral with weight, with teeth, with a feeling behind it. Not rage, not vengeance. Something harder to find, something quieter. Respect. Because across lunch counters and living rooms, across screens in cities, people weren't just watching someone expose power, they were watching someone hold her ground. And for the first time in years, America saw a new kind of leadership. One that didn't shout. It stared back. The West Wing pulsed with alarm. Phones rang before they were even picked up. Footsteps echoed down marble hallways at a sprint, not a walk. Aides spoke in clipped sentences, eyes darting to televisions where Jasmine Crockett's voice played on an endless loop. In the communications bullpen, the press secretary barked over a speakerphone, pacing so fast her heels left scuff marks on the tile. "Say it's unverified. Say it's a partisan smear. Say it's a political hit job orchestrated by the far left. I don't care what you call it, just make sure by noon no one's quoting her without a but in front of it. She yanked the phone cord free and turned to the crisis team. How the hell did she get that folder? No one answered. In the Roosevelt room, Trump's inner circle huddled like generals after a surprise attack. A digital strategist pointed at the TV. This isn't a clip. It's a moment. It's going to live for years. A lawyer whispered, "Do we try to deny the accounts or discredit the source?" Silence. Then a senior aide, face pale and fingers trembling, asked the question they were all afraid to say out loud. Who leaked this? No one made eye contact, because the truth was simpler and darker. Someone inside the system wanted this to be known, and Jasmine Crockett had been waiting. Weeks earlier, in a quiet Dallas office, miles from the spotlight, a thick brown envelope had landed on her desk. No return address, no letter inside, just one line scrawled in blue ink on the front for the people. She didn't open it right away. She'd seen hoaxes before, but something about the handwriting, too careful, too steady, made her pause. When she finally unfolded the contents, her breath caught in her chest. Wire transfers, account slips, corporate registration papers, names, dates, locations, Zurich, Dubai, Hong Kong, Trump, Ivanka, Eric. It wasn't a theory, it was a trail. She locked the door, turned off the lights, and started cross-referencing every line. 3 analysts worked through the night with her. Routing numbers matched real banks. The shell companies were real registered active and quietly erased from public records 2 months after the transfers. Every dot connected. But what stopped her cold wasn't the money. It was the timing. The largest transfer to Ivanka's company. It came just days before a major trade policy was reversed in the Gulf. The $7 million tied to Eric's firm, it landed 1 week after a government contract shifted hands. It wasn't just corruption, it was coordination. She stared at the documents for hours that first night. Adrian, her chief of staff, stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the street below like someone might knock down the door at any second. "Jazz," he said, quiet but clear. "You know what happens if you open this folder in public?" She looked at him, exhausted, steel-eyed. "I know. But I also know what happens if I don't." Back in the West Wing, Trump paced the Oval Office like a caged bear, muttering under his breath. She thinks this is over. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. Behind him, a junior aide whispered to another, "No spin is strong enough to erase that footage." Because outside those walls, the country had already seen it. And for once, the spin wasn't faster than the truth. It was drowning in it. By dawn, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a symbol, and symbols spread like wildfires. Across the country, her image stood frozen mid-sentence on screens, hand hovering above the folder. Eyes locked on Trump, voice clipped into 3 words that had become gospel overnight. Their bank records. That single phrase, clean and unshakable, was already printed across black hoodies in DC shops before lunch. On TikTok, teenagers looped it under dramatic music. On Instagram, her silhouette was stenciled against American flags. On sidewalks in Philadelphia and Oakland, murals appeared in spray paint overnight, her holding the folder with the caption, "Truth doesn't stutter." She didn't ask for any of it. Inside her office, Jasmine sat surrounded by stacks of notes, coffee cups, and a blinking phone that hadn't stopped ringing in 10 hours. Every network wanted her. Every magazine wanted a quote. Every activist group wanted a speech. But she didn't smile. She didn't lean into the attention. She just stared at the folder, the same one from the hearing, still unopened since she set it down. "This isn't about fame," she told her exhausted team, her voice low but firm. "It's about accountability. The second I forget that he wins." Adrian nodded, rubbing his temples. "And what about when they start digging? He's not going to stay quiet." Jasmine didn't blink. "Then let him dig. The truth's deeper than any hole he can bury me in." But outside her glass door, the machine was already turning. On the second floor of a New York newsroom, a Fox News producer clutched a stack of old Crockett campaign ads and tossed them on the table. She used to be a defense attorney, right? Let's find every client she defended who turned out dirty. Paint her soft on crime, unstable, ambitious, make the spotlight burn. Across the room, a voice from legal whispered, Careful, the public loves her right now. The producer snapped back. That's the point. We don't need to convince them. We just need to distract them. Within hours, headlines were drafted, segments scheduled, graphics built. One anchor practiced her line in front of the mirror. Is Congresswoman Crockett a truth teller or a radical in disguise? The storm was coming. A different kind. Not political, personal. Back in her office, Jasmine took a breath. Deep, centered. She wasn't naive. She'd seen what happened when women, especially black women, spoke too clearly for the system's comfort. They weren't just debated. They were discredited, dissected, branded. But she didn't flinch. Because the folder wasn't just paper. It was proof. And no matter how loud the noise outside grew, she knew the truth didn't need volume, it needed discipline. But as the lights of the media swiveled to her face and the machine of power prepared its smear, a deeper question pulsed beneath the surface. In a world built on spectacle, could truth survive the spotlight or would it be swallowed by it? The gavel cracked twice. Session resumed. The lights inside the chamber felt hotter this time, not from the bulbs, but from expectation. Everyone knew she had more. And Jasmine Crockett knew they were all waiting to see if she'd blink under the weight of her own momentum. She didn't. She stood slowly, deliberately, as if daring the room to breathe without permission. The second folder was darker, thicker, its seal broken clean like something sacred had been opened. Her fingers moved with precision. No shaking, no pause, just paper and truth ready to collide. The next transfer, she began, her voice firm, but even occurred on April 9th, 2020. Origin Emirates NBD Dubai. Destination and entity registered under the name Arlington Gold Holdings, a private holding company. She looked up, locking eyes with Trump. Owned by Ivanka Trump. A low gasp rolled across the chamber like distant thunder. One senator dropped their pen. Another crossed their arms and leaned back, face unreadable. The murmurs came next, fast, rising anxious, but not louder than the heartbeat of the moment. Trump's hands slammed the table with a sharp crack. "She's lying," he shouted, voice cracking, just enough to betray the panic beneath the rage. "You're all complicit, every last one of you." His finger jabbed toward the committee, then toward the press gallery, then finally back at Jasmine. "You think you can parade my daughter's name for some TikTok moment? This is treason." Jasmine didn't flinch. Not once. She adjusted the mic, then held up the page for the cameras to zoom in. Her tone didn't waver, it sharpened. "This isn't opinion, sir. It's documentation. Bank to bank. Ledger to ledger. $5.8 million routed through 2 intermediary entities in Qatar before landing in an account tied to Arlington Gold Holdings." She laid the page flat again. "And the account is still active." Trump scoffed, red in the face, his breathing audible through the mic. "You're twisting this. You don't even understand how international assets work." Jasmine's reply was surgical. "Sir, the American people understand when something looks hidden and when something is." A pause stretched across the room. One of Trump's aides whispered furiously into a phone. A news anchor in the gallery mouthed the words, "This is bigger than we thought." Then Jasmine leaned forward slightly, just enough to make the moment lean with her. "If there's an explanation," she said, "then give it. If there's context, provide it. But don't shout lie just because the truth doesn't come with your signature." Trump rose halfway from his chair, then stopped. It wasn't control, it was confusion. The playbook had failed. Jasmine lowered her eyes to the folder again, flipping to the next page. But the room, the nation, was still on this one. Because for all his fury, Trump hadn't denied the transfer. And when the room goes quiet after a scream, that silence doesn't clear the air. It tightens it. The silence didn't hold it fractured. Whispers rippled through the chamber like an undercurrent no one could stop. Some lawmakers leaned into each other, murmuring behind cupped hands. Others glanced sideways, not at Jasmine, but at Trump. For the first time, the calculation on their faces wasn't about loyalty. It was about survival. 2 rows behind the president, a Republican senator shifted in his seat, tugging at his tie like it had grown too tight. Another, a longtime Trump ally, scribbled something down, then scratched it out before finishing. At the far end of the committee table, a quiet clap echoed once. Soft, almost accidental, but it happened, and Trump heard it. He snapped toward the sound like a blade unsheathed. Who the hell just clapped? He barked, his voice cracking with volume, not power. Who's cheering this circus? But no one answered, because even the ones still with him weren't sure how long they'd be. In the CNN control room, a producer leaned over the live feed, eyes wide. "He's cracking," she whispered to the anchor, who repeated it on air seconds later. "This is the most visibly unglued we've seen the president in real time, and it's happening in front of the entire country." Back in the chamber, Jasmine didn't even look up. She flipped another page. Calm, unhurried. The rhythm of someone who knew exactly what she was about to deliver and how deep it would cut. Her voice pierced through the noise like a scalpel. September 3rd, 2021. Transfer amount $7 million, originating from Pacific Star Bank, Hong Kong. Routed through 3 shell corporations. Final destination, a Delaware-registered firm owned by Eric Trump, listed under the alias E Global Consulting. Gasps this time, not whispers. Full audible gasps, followed by a sudden rise in phone screens across the press gallery. Dozens of notifications hit at once. News outlets were already pushing the headline. Trump didn't slam the table this time. He stood. "You're attacking my children now," he snarled. "Is that the game? You couldn't take me, so now you go after them." His voice echoed off the marble walls, but it didn't land the same. The room didn't recoil. It watched. Jasmine finally raised her eyes. And her voice didn't rise. It lowered, which somehow hit harder. "No one's attacking your children, Mr. President. We're examining financial records tied to public office. If those records point to your children, that's not an attack. That's a pattern." Trump turned to his lawyers, but none of them met his gaze. One tapped their tablet, pretending to scroll. Another looked at his shoes. It was happening, and he could feel it. The room was slipping. Control was bleeding out. And the woman holding the folder wasn't even sweating. She turned one more page. Deliberate. Silent. A thunderstorm with no sound. The unraveling wasn't a headline. It was live. And no one could look away. Trump exploded like a fuse finally reaching flame. "This is a circus," he shouted, arms wide, voice thundering through the chamber. "A political stunt, nothing more. You people should be ashamed of yourselves." He pointed at the committee, at the cameras, at Jasmine. "This isn't justice, it's a damn sideshow." The room flinched but didn't move. No one rushed to support him. Not this time. Behind him, his aides froze mid-whisper. 2 seats down, a senator quietly reached for a bottle of water, hand visibly shaking. On the far end, a reporter mouthed to his cameraman, "Keep rolling. Don't cut away." But Jasmine stood still. She didn't even blink. Her folder was closed now. The documents had done their damage, and her hands rested atop them like a judge after the verdict. She looked at Trump. Not with fury, not with fear, just clarity. And then she said it, softly, cleanly. No music, no performance. "Then the tent was built by your family's hidden accounts." The room cracked open, not with sound, with stillness. A silence so sharp it could cut glass. Chairs stopped shifting. Pens froze mid-sentence. One aide in the back sat down without realizing she'd stood up. Even the cameras, always moving, always searching, locked in place. Every lens focused on her. Every microphone leaned toward the stillness. Trump didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, blinking like someone who'd been struck but hadn't yet felt the pain. For a full minute, no one said a word. Not one. Not the chairman. Not the press. Not even the president. The silence was its own kind of verdict. And it was loud. When the chairman finally cleared his throat and tapped the gavel, once it sounded like a thunderclap in a cathedral. "Let the witness finish her statement," he said, voice tight with control, though even he wasn't breathing normally. Jasmine nodded once and leaned slightly forward. Her voice remained steady, but her words carved deeper than volume ever could. "I didn't come here to tear down a man," she said. "I came here to lift up the truth. If that truth is inconvenient, if it feels like chaos, it's only because the silence around it has lasted too long." She paused again. "Not for drama, but for weight. Call it a circus if you want, but this isn't theater. This is accountability. And sometimes, the spotlight just reveals what's already under the tent." Trump didn't speak. Couldn't. The red in his face had faded to something paler, tighter. Not surrender, but recognition. He knew. The cameras knew. And America watching in real time felt it. The hearing had reached a crossroads, not between parties, not even between facts and fiction, but between volume and truth, between those who yell and those who reveal. Because in a room full of microphones, only one voice had been steady, and now the country had to ask itself, what's more dangerous, a lie shouted, or the truth calmly spoken? The door creaked open to a quiet hum. No press, no podium, no marble echo, just the soft hum of an office AC unit struggling against the Texas heat. Jasmine Crockett stepped inside her blazer, still creased from the flight, the folder still in her hands like a shadow that refused to let go. Staffers rose from their desks instinctively, but she waved them off. "Just give me a minute," she said, voice low, wearied but anchored. She wasn't back for rest. She was back for grounding. The blinds were halfway drawn, letting in soft streaks of morning sun, and in the corner of the waiting room sat a grandmother in a Sunday dress, one hand on her purse, the other resting gently on the shoulder of a boy no older than 10. He wore a backpack, unlaced sneakers, and a wide-eyed look, like he wasn't quite sure if this was a school visit or something more sacred. When Jasmine entered, the grandmother rose first, slowly, purposefully. "We came early," she said, voice cracking with a blend of reverence and emotion. "Didn't want to miss you." He watched the hearing, ma'am, sat through the whole thing, didn't blink. She placed her hand gently on the boy's back. He turned to me when it ended and said, "Grandma, she's not scared of him." The words stopped Jasmine in her tracks. She looked down at the boy, small still, but staring up at her like she was made of something unshakable. She knelt, knees hitting the tile, softly folder, set aside like it no longer mattered in this room. "I'm not brave all the time," she whispered to him. "Sometimes my hands shake too. Sometimes my voice almost cracks." She reached for his hand, small, warm, unsure, and wrapped hers around it. "But truth isn't about being fearless, baby. It's about standing up, even when you are." The boy didn't speak, but he nodded, eyes wide, soaking in every word like scripture. The grandmother wiped a tear from her cheek with the edge of her sleeve. Jasmine smiled, soft, tired, but full. This was why the folder mattered. Not for headlines, not for cable news panels or TikTok edits, but for this moment in this room, with this boy who would grow up remembering not just what she said on live television, but what she knelt down to say when no one else was watching. Behind her, a phone rang. Aides whispered about the next press cycle. Fox was doubling down. Another subpoena was rumored. But for now, in this quiet corner of Texas, time paused. And Jasmine Crockett, the woman who faced down the presidency, chose not to speak to power, but to legacy. Because sometimes real courage isn't broadcast. It kneels, it listens, and it plants something a camera can't capture. The lights in Tulsa burned hot, not from heat, but from desperation. The stage was drenched in red, white, and roaring sound, with thousands packed shoulder to shoulder, chanting his name like a prayer they hoped would still work. Trump stormed into thundering applause, waving with practiced confidence. But something about his gait felt off, tighter, heavier, like he was walking uphill in front of the people who once carried him. He grabbed the mic like a lifeline, but the fury arrived before the facts. "She's a liar," he roared, finger stabbing the air. "A nobody, a radical fraud who wants to destroy your president, destroy your family, and destroy America." The crowd roared on cue, but it wasn't the roar of momentum. It was muscle memory. "She faked those documents," he barked again. "We'll sue her. We'll bury her. She'll regret ever stepping into that hearing." His voice cracked on, barely just enough to catch the mic's feedback and slice it through the arena. The pause after wasn't dramatic, it was uneasy. Even the front row MAGA hats pulled low, and flags waved high exchange glances. A cheer rose anyway. It had to, but something had shifted. Backstage, an aide whispered into her phone, "He's going off script again." In the press pit, a New York Times correspondent scribbled a single word into her notepad, fraying. On CNN, the live feed cut to analysts mid-sentence. His tone, one said, eyes wide, "It's like Nixon in the final weeks. There's defiance, yes. But listen closer, it's drowning in fear." Trump pounded the podium again. "They want to silence me because I fight for you," he screamed. This isn't about wire transfers. This is about control. They hate success. They hate my family because we win. But the volume betrayed him. The higher he yelled, the tighter his throat became. His suit didn't hang right. The shoulders slouched, the tie crooked. For the first time, the illusion of command was slipping. His fist shook not from conviction, but from the tremble of a man cornered, not crowned. The cameras caught it, the networks caught it, and the people, even those cheering, felt it. A girl in the upper balcony whispered to her boyfriend, "Why's he shouting so much about her if it's not true?" Her voice was nearly lost in the din, but not to him. He didn't answer. He just stared at the jumbotron, replaying her words from the hearing. The American people can read the documents themselves. Trump slammed the mic down one final time. We will not be defeated by a smear campaign, but the crowd's energy no longer surged. It hung. It buzzed. It blinked uncertainly. Because beneath the rallying cries, beneath the American flags and blaring speakers, everyone felt the same thing. This wasn't dominance. This was denial, and it was screaming to be believed. The clip wouldn't stop playing. From classrooms to corner stores, Jasmine Crockett's voice echoed across the country like the aftershock of a quake that hadn't finished rumbling. In a civics class in Detroit, the lights dimmed as the projector flickered on. Students watched in silence as Jasmine held up the folder, her words piercing the air. The truth doesn't need volume. It needs discipline. One girl at the back whispered. She didn't even flinch, as if saying it louder might shatter something sacred. In Georgia, a pastor stood before a packed congregation Bible in one hand, phone in the other. He quoted her in his Sunday sermon, "Accountability is not a partisan issue, it's a moral one." And for once, the pews didn't shift or check watches. They leaned in. They listened. In small towns, the clip played on loop in diners. In airports, people paused mid-walk to glance at the monitors overhead. In barber shops, the debate grew loud but not chaotic. Fathers and daughters argued across dinner tables, voices low but intense. Who do you believe, her or him? Some said she was just another politician. Others said she was the first real one they'd seen in years. And in Washington, the ripple hit like a wave. That morning, C-SPAN ran a scroll Congress to review formal subpoenas for international banking records. It was dry, procedural. But underneath, a current of panic surged through the Capitol. Because the word subpoena didn't just mean investigation. It meant validation. It meant someone took her seriously. In her office, Jasmine stood at the window, watching the sidewalks below fill with cameras, reporters and supporters holding signs with her quotes printed in bold. Her team buzzed around her calls to make interviews to approve, but she stayed still, forehead pressed lightly to the cool glass. Outside, a group of middle schoolers walked by on a field trip. One boy broke from the pack, pointed up to her office, and said to his teacher, "That's where she works, right?" The one who told the truth, the teacher nodded quiet. That's her. Across the country, the divide didn't shrink, it sharpened. But something else grew alongside it. Awareness, curiosity, a new standard. In a living room in Ohio, a mother muted the TV and asked her teenage son, "You saw it all. What do you think?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think I've never seen someone make him look small without even raising their voice." Back on the Senate floor, the clerk read the list of proposed subpoenas. The chamber didn't erupt. It pulsed like a volcano shifting underground just before the earth splits. And the question, once whispered, now thundered in silence across the nation. Can one moment of courage ripple far enough to change the course of a country? The hearing room was colder this time, not in temperature, but in tone. Cameras were already rolling before Jasmine Crockett entered, but there was no roar of anticipation, no social media frenzy waiting to ignite. This wasn't about revelation anymore. It was about resolve. And when Jasmine stepped back into the chamber, folder in hand, but unopened, the weight in the room shifted like a courtroom awaiting final judgment. She didn't bring new documents. She didn't need to. What she brought was presence, the kind that doesn't fade after a headline. She moved with the steadiness of someone who had nothing left to prove, only truth left to reinforce. Every step to the witness chair echoed a little louder than it should have. And when she sat, she didn't fidget. She waited. The chairman cleared his throat, nodded. "Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed." She took a breath, long quiet, then began. No charts, no flash drives, no breaking news, she said calmly. Just the truth once more for the record. She let the pause settle before continuing. 3 wire transfers, 3 names, 3 destinations, all tied to one presidency. Trump shifted in his seat across the room, eyes narrowed, hands clenched. He was silent for a beat too long, then snapped. You've said this already. You're grandstanding. The chairman raised the gavel before she even blinked. The witness has the floor, Mr. President. Jasmine didn't acknowledge the interruption. She let the silence work harder than his shout. Then slowly, with the weight of the entire moment resting in her voice, she delivered a sentence that sliced through every whisper, every camera lens, every ego in the room. The presidency, she said, is not a shield against the truth. Silence. Total. Not even a chair creaked. Even the press gallery, always whispering, froze. Trump leaned forward slightly as if to fire back, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the gavel still gripped in the chairman's hand. Maybe it was the clarity in Jasmine's eyes. Or maybe finally it was the realization that nothing he could yell would undo what had already taken root in the public's mind. Jasmine continued, her voice low but surgical. Being elected doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you accountable. And if these financial records show what they appear to, then the office you hold doesn't protect you. It demands more from you. A murmur rose. Not dramatic, just acknowledgement. Lawmakers glanced at one another, not with shock, but with something heavier expectation. She closed her statement simply. No crescendo, no dramatic pause. Truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs someone who won't run from it. And as she stepped away from the microphone, leaving the folder untouched, it became clear she hadn't returned to escalate. She'd returned to finish what had already begun. The counterattack came fast, like clockwork, dressed in desperation. Less than 24 hours after Jasmine Crockett's second testimony, inboxes filled with whispers dressed as scoops. A leak here, a headline there, out-of-context text from years ago. Grainy video clips spliced for maximum distortion flooded social feeds with captions screaming, radical, reckless, unfit. They unearthed old cases from her days as a public defender, painting her courtroom wins as moral compromises. Conservative media ran late-night specials, calling her a fame chaser with an agenda. The word dangerous trended for all the wrong reasons. Anonymous accounts resurfaced with surgically crafted smears, every sentence engineered to make noise loud enough to blur the facts. But Jasmine didn't blink. When asked for comment, she faced the camera dead-on voice, sharp enough to cut through the static. If they dig through my life and find more truth, let them, she said. I've got nothing to hide. That clip alone reached 6 million views by nightfall, not because it was loud, but because it was clear. The kind of clarity people hadn't heard in politics for years. On Twitter, a new wave surged, hashtag truth over power and hashtag receipts ready exploded across timelines. Young voters began stitching her words into edits set to gospel choirs and orchestral beats. Teachers printed her quote on classroom walls. Even late-night comedians dropped the punchlines and leaned into the fire. Meanwhile, Trump's camp doubled down. One advisor leaked a dossier of her past tweets, grasping for something viral, but none of it stuck. Because the more they swung, the more it looked like flailing. And the more she stood still, the more powerful she appeared. In a news segment gone viral for the wrong reason, a conservative anchor shouted, "She's playing the victim." The internet answered back in real time. She's not playing anything. She's just not backing down. And that terrified them more than anything. Because the strategy wasn't working. The old playbook smear, discredit, drown out was crumbling in real time against a woman who didn't play defense. She didn't argue with the lies. She spoke louder with her stillness. Every attack only widened the contrast. They threw smoke. She brought receipts. They twisted. She clarified. And the country watched not for the drama, but for the difference. In a small town in Missouri, a retired librarian posted, "They want to ruin her, but she won't fold." That's how you know she's telling the truth. Thousands liked it. Thousands more shared it. Because retaliation may shift headlines, but it never rewrites the facts. And Jasmine Crockett knew. The more they tried to bury her, the deeper the public dug for what else she had to say. No one expected the name. The hearing resumed without fanfare. No press alert, no breaking Chiron. Just a subtle notation on the updated witness list, A. Whitlock, Financial Compliance Officer, Geneva Division. The chamber didn't tense, not yet, but something in the air felt different. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, pen in hand, unreadable. Across the aisle, Trump slouched in his seat, arms crossed, eyes flicking toward his counsel, then back again. Whitlock stepped forward with the posture of someone who never wanted to be here and who had everything to lose for being so. His hand trembled slightly as he raised it for the oath, but his voice didn't. When asked to confirm the documents, his reply was immediate. They're real, all of them. A paper shuffled behind the chairman's mic. Jasmine looked up. Trump didn't. Whitlock continued. The accounts in Zurich, Dubai, and Hong Kong, all traced to legal entities connected to members of the Trump family. I flagged them internally, no one followed up. He hesitated, then added, I was told not to. The room didn't explode, it froze. No yelling, no interruptions, just silence. A different kind of silence. Not stunned, not staged. This was the sound of truth landing. Trump shifted in his chair, finally looking up, but not at Whitlock, at Jasmine. His expression wasn't fire anymore. It was fog. The look of a man realizing slowly that a weapon he never saw had just been used, and it didn't make a sound. The chairman cleared his throat but didn't speak. No one did. Cameras zoomed in. Phones stopped scrolling. Every heartbeat in the room felt suspended. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, not to speak but to listen, because for the first time in 3 sessions she didn't need to say anything. The voice behind the curtain had stepped into the light, and the light was blistering. One by one, lawmakers looked down at their notes, at their phones, at each other. Not in disbelief, but in recalculation, because now it wasn't just her word. It wasn't just the documents. It was corroboration from inside the vault. Trump opened his mouth to speak but stopped. His breath caught. His jaw clenched. Whatever he was going to say, it wasn't enough. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat. She didn't rise. She simply closed her folder, clicked her pen, and sat back. The blow had landed, not with a roar, but with the kind of finality that doesn't need volume. And the only sound left was the question hanging in the air like a loaded truth. What if the final weapon isn't rage, but quiet, unshakable truth? Something had shifted, not in the courtroom, but in the country. The morning after Whitlock's quiet confirmation, the nation didn't erupt. It adjusted, slowly, subtly, like a tide pulling back before a storm surge. In diners across Ohio, in subway cars through D.C., on porches in Phoenix, people didn't talk about the numbers. They talked about her. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just let the truth sit there. By noon, local radio hosts were quoting Jasmine Crockett's line, "The presidency is not a shield against the truth." On TikTok, teens lip-synced her calm replies next to Trump's outbursts. A side-by-side video of her silence during his shouting match hit 6.2 million views in 12 hours. The caption read, "Guess who the adult in the room was?" Cable anchors tried to frame it as a political bombshell, but something deeper had landed. It wasn't just about the transfers anymore. It was about composure, the way she stayed still while the storm tried to rattle her. A CNN panelist, once skeptical of her methods, said it plainly, this wasn't courtroom drama. This was character, and the country noticed. The polls followed. Among independents, her favorability jumped by 17 points. Among suburban women over 50, the phrase "she didn't stoop to him" trended in exit interviews. One woman told MSNBC, "She reminded me of my daughter." Grace under fire. That matters now. In South Carolina, a retired Marine called into a local AM station. His voice cracked as he said, "She never raised her voice." And he lost the room. Even Fox News couldn't ignore the shift. A begrudging analyst admitted on air, "Say what you want about her politics, but Jasmine Crockett has become a symbol of restraint under pressure. And America respects that." But it wasn't just media, it was movement. Teachers brought the hearings into their civics lessons, not for the scandal, but for the civility. Pastors read her quotes from the pulpit. In a Florida barbershop, someone printed her words on the wall. If they dig through my life and find more truth, let them. This wasn't spin. It wasn't spectacle. It was something harder to manufacture and even harder to fight. It was earned respect, and it didn't roar through the headlines. It whispered through living rooms, rode buses through back streets, echoed through family group chats and late-night phone calls. It was quiet, but it was everywhere. And as the week rolled on, one truth became clear. She didn't need to win the argument. She'd already won the country's attention. Now the people were speaking and they sounded a lot like her. The quiet turned to motion. At precisely 9:04 a.m., a congressional alert went out, subpoenas issued. The Oversight Committee had authorized full pursuit of the offshore wire trails. 4 banks were named. 2 had offices in Zurich. 1 had ties to a Cayman trust. The 4th, ironically, was headquartered in Manhattan, 4 blocks from Trump Tower. By noon, reporters camped outside federal buildings from D.C. to Geneva. The headlines wrote themselves, "The hunt begins." What started as political theater now had teeth. Jasmine Crockett's binder was no longer a symbol. It was evidence, and the system was finally moving. Inside her office, the air was still. Jasmine stood by the window staring down at Constitution Avenue. Her phone buzzed, then buzzed again. Wire confirmations, document scans, updates from committee counsel. But her hand didn't move. Her breath had slowed. Her posture, always firm, seemed to lean just slightly into the weight of what came next. Her chief of staff, Adrian, closed the door gently behind him. "They're responding," he said, voice low. "The banks aren't even fighting. Some are scared. One already gave us Eric's signature authorization." Jasmine didn't look up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared too." Adrian paused. The room felt heavier for a moment, like history had stopped to listen. "Good," he said. She turned confused. "That's how I know you're ready." There was no rallying speech, no dramatic piano score, just that sentence floating between them like a hand reaching across silence. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes shimmered with something rarely seen: vulnerability. Not weakness, risk. The kind you don't walk away from. The kind that rewrites legacies. Outside cameras caught the subpoena van leaving Capitol Hill. Analysts on every network scrambled to connect the names: campaign donors, shell firms, family members. Eric, Don Jr., even whispers of a familiar surname: Kushner. The circus had become a crucible, and Jasmine, the woman once mocked for being too loud, was now the epicenter of calm fury. The subpoenas carried her signature. The ripple began with her voice. And now the weight of it all pressed in, not just from the opposition, but from the responsibility of truth finally being believed. She sat at her desk, fingers laced, eyes steady. Adrian placed a single sheet in front of her, an unredacted transaction flagged from 2019. Her initials were already printed in the bottom margin. The moment wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Congress was moving, and the country, ready or not, was moving with it. The cameras never stopped rolling, but now they moved differently. What began as clips for news cycles had become a full-scale documentary. A camera crew followed quietly behind Jasmine Crockett, not chasing scandal, but preserving something deeper. Not the fireworks, but the aftermath. Not the noise, but the shift beneath it. The documentary's working title wasn't flashy, Day After Truth, but the footage it captured was thunderous in its silence. Late-night hosts, once eager with punchlines, paused their laughter. One choked up mid-monologue. Another simply stared into the lens and said, "We owe her more than applause." Satire gave way to sincerity. The internet noticed. A meme of Jasmine's silent stare from the hearing trended for 72 hours, hashtag she didn't flinch. But far from the spotlight, Jasmine returned to Dallas. No entourage, no podium. Just the steady hum of fluorescent lights in a county courtroom she once fought inside every day. She stepped through the side door, heels echoing on the tile like distant drums. The room was empty, jury box, still witness, chair untouched, flags hanging like memories. She walked to the table where she once defended people no one else would. The table where mothers cried, where teens trembled, where a young public defender once whispered, "You matter," into the darkness of a broken system. That whisper had traveled far, all the way to the halls of Congress, and now it circled back heavier than ever. She placed her palm flat on the old desk. Her eyes closed. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The camera behind her zoomed in, not on her face, but on the scar on her wrist, the faded edge of a courthouse badge still pinned inside her coat. This wasn't nostalgia. This was grounding. She hadn't risen above the system. She had risen through it. The director whispered to his crew, "Don't cut." Across America, people watch differently now. Not for the drama, but for the steadiness. For the reminder that politics could mean presence. That leadership wasn't about shouting louder, but standing longer. A retired teacher in Michigan wrote, "I told my students for years that truth matters. I didn't think they believed me. Now they do." A pastor in Georgia rewrote his sermon to include her name. A teenager in Oakland made her speech the soundtrack to a TikTok. And yet for Jasmine, it was never about becoming a symbol. It was about not flinching when truth knocked. About walking back into the rooms that built her, not as a hero, but as proof. The camera blinked red. A question remained in the silence. Was this just a flash of courage or the first page of something we've waited a lifetime to see? The bell rang, but no one moved. Inside a dimly lit government classroom in Des Moines, sunlight streaked across the pause frame on the screen. Jasmine Crockett seated before Congress. Her eyes steady, her hands still. The room was quiet, not out of boredom, but reverence. The moment didn't feel like history, it felt present. A heartbeat frozen in time, still pulsing beneath the skin of the country. The teacher clicked pause. "All right," she said. "What did you notice?" Hands slowly rose. She didn't shout, one boy said. She waited, another added. And then from the back of the room, a girl's voice broke the stillness. "Wasn't she afraid?" The teacher exhaled. She looked up at the screen again at the woman who had stood when silence felt heavier than noise. "Probably," she said softly. But that's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear, it's standing anyway. The words lingered longer than the lesson. In classrooms across the country from Seattle to Savannah, the same footage played. Not because it went viral, but because it endured. It wasn't the fire of outrage that made it last. It was the calm within the fire. Students debated the hearing's meaning. Some saw defiance, others saw restraint. But all agreed on one thing. Something changed in that room, and it hadn't changed back since. In one school, a civics teacher marked it as the start of a modern American awakening. In another, a young girl scribbled Jasmine's quote in the margins of her notebook, "The presidency is not a shield against the truth." And in quiet corners of the country, coffee shops, libraries, courtrooms, people remembered where they were the day silence spoke louder than power. This wasn't just about what happened in the hearing. It was about what followed, about what stayed. And for a generation raised on noise, Jasmine's quiet resolve became something rare, an echo that time couldn't mute. The lecture hall was small, no more than 80 students folded into creaking wooden seats, notebooks, half-open, phones forgotten. There were no reporters, no podium lights, no security detail pacing the aisles. Just Jasmine Crockett standing at the edge of the stage in a navy blazer, holding nothing but a paper cup of tea. She didn't project her voice. She didn't need to. "You've seen the viral clips," she began, voice barely above a whisper. But that wasn't the moment that mattered. "This is." She paused, letting the silence breathe. No one coughed. No one moved. "Truth doesn't shout," she said. "It stands still while the world screams around it." A few students blinked harder than others. A girl in the second row put her pen down as if writing would have broken something sacred. Jasmine continued, her tone soft, unwavering. "We live in a time where volume is mistaken for value, where fury is entertainment, where headlines spin faster than healing." She scanned the room. But when the dust settles, when the cameras pack up, what's left standing is what was always real. In the back row, a young man who hadn't spoken all semester leaned forward. She didn't talk about power or scandal or what it meant to go viral. She talked about sitting with a mother who lost her home, about reading hate mail and choosing not to answer, about the silence that follows courage and how it echoes longer than applause ever could. "I don't want you to remember me," Jasmine said, almost smiling. "I want you to remember that even the calmest voice can break the loudest lie." The room exhaled as one, and just like that, the speech was over. No thunder, no grand exit, just footsteps down creaky stairs and the quiet certainty that something real had just passed through. The office was quiet sunlight streaming through half-closed blinds, casting soft lines across a wall of framed newspaper clippings and muted certificates. But at the center, between a Texas state flag and a worn bookshelf, hung a single sheet of paper in a black wooden frame. It was the first page of the financial evidence, the one that started it all. The numbers were smudged now from being handled so many times, but one thing remained clear. On the back, written in Jasmine Crockett's careful pen, "For the people." No flourish, no signature, just intention. She stood alone in front of it that morning 1 year to the day after the hearing arms crossed eyes sharp. A documentary crew quietly filmed her silhouette. No one spoke. Jasmine finally turned to the camera, not with fury or triumph, but with something deeper. A kind of stillness only earned by walking through fire and coming out holding the truth. If one voice held the line, she said, "Maybe now it's your turn." The silence afterward didn't need to be filled. Across the country, that footage would roll out to classrooms, community centers, courtrooms. Young organizers would replay that final frame until they could quote it cold. But here in this moment, it was just a woman, a receipt, and a question not aimed at presidents or pundits, but at every ordinary soul watching. In your own life, will you speak even when it's safer to be quiet? Or will you let someone else write your story? As we grow older, we often believe our voice doesn't carry the weight it once did. But this story reminds us that truth doesn't age, it deepens. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She raised her conviction. In a world of noise, it wasn't anger that made history, it was clarity. The courage to speak with purpose, even when it's uncomfortable, even when powerful forces try to silence you, is the kind of strength that transforms not just moments, but legacies. Because leadership isn't about shouting, it's about standing still when the world trembles, and choosing integrity when silence is safer. In your community, in your family, in your own heart, where have you stayed silent? And what truth is still waiting to be spoken just once by someone brave enough to begin? Let that person be you. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.